Thank you everyone for joining us today for today's webinar. Today's title is Mending the Disconnect Between PR and Digital to better position your firm as a trusted advisor. Just a few ground rules to kick off today's session. Today's webinar is being recorded and you should receive a copy of this along with the slides in the probably next day or two. So definitely by the end of the week. We should have some time for Q&A at the end of today's session. So if you do have any questions which are triggered off the back of today's presentation, feel free to drop these into the Q&A chat bar on your Zoom screen, and we will address these at the end of today's session. So let's go straight into today's presentation. I'll briefly just mention who we are. My name is Mario Kiriakou. You all should probably received an email from me, so I'm sure you're pretty familiar with the name, but I'm one of the co-founders here at Ratio FS. We are a digital agency, and a lot of the things we're going to talk around today is areas that we've helped clients over the last number of years with solving challenges around some of the areas we're covering off today, and look forward to covering it off in more detail shortly. I'll pass it over to my colleague Julian to just introduce himself.
Thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Julian Ray. I'm the founder and managing director of Liminal. We're a communications agency specialized in working with financial services businesses. That ranges from the big global banks, asset managers, a number of which you'll see on the slides here, through to real estate, commodities, service providers, obviously a lot in the fintech space at the moment, and increasingly in the blockchain and crypto world as well. So there's always something to keep us occupied. And I should also say we're founding members of the FinCom Alliance, which is a network of independent, like-minded agencies also focused on working with financial services businesses around Europe.
So we've got quite a lot we're going to cover off today. Just to outline the agenda at a high level, we're going to explore a couple of things today. We're going to look at how to continue the journey from external media. So all of the great work you're creating with your PR investments, how you can then transfer that onto your own digital channels that you control as an asset management business. We explore the role that digital plays in amplifying your PR communication, and we're going to look at how digital and PR can work hand in hand to build your firm's brand. We're going to go into quite a bit of detail throughout the presentation, so we look forward to going through this shortly.
Perfect. So PR and digital. As we know, communications has evolved a great deal in recent years, and the big part of that has been the way that digital in particular has started to play a much bigger role. I think it's fair to say that asset management maybe has been, particularly when you think about the more institutional facing end of the spectrum, has maybe been a little bit slower to adopt some of these new strategies and practices and technologies. But what we see is that they're catching up very quickly and becoming a lot more sophisticated in terms of how they use this. And actually, if you look on the next slide, you'll see we actually did a survey at the end of last year where we spoke to financial services communications professionals around the world, or around Europe, sorry, in terms of how their communications were changing. And 85% of them said that they'd increased the use of digital channels in their communications. Now, probably this is no big surprise to you. Everyone is doing this, but it sort of goes to show, the scale of what we're talking about here. Having said that, what's also very clear is that those who often loudly have been proclaiming the death of traditional media are very much very premature in their thinking. In the same survey, we saw 76% of respondents said that they felt media influence had actually increased because these platforms, these publications had gained importance. So it's clear that PR is still a very important part of the mix, and particularly for asset managers, alongside digital. And this is really it, right? When we look at how asset managers typically tackle this, PR sits alongside digital. The two operate in parallel, largely independently. And even though they usually, they start from the same marketing priorities, they promote the same messaging, and they work towards the same goals. So in some way that, to us, that didn't really make a lot of sense. And our view is that the two should work much more in partnership, not just in parallel, to bring your customer on a journey rather than just create a series of, of individual engagements. And so this is really what we wanted to talk to you about today, how you can think about establishing a more continuous, more joined up process that can evolve over time, particularly in terms of how you can take insights gathered along the way and feed that back in at the top to inform your market strategy and your messaging as you go. And by adopting this approach in your own organization, you can really start to turn PR and digital into much more complementary activities in which sort of each discipline enhances and contributes to the value of the other. And what you end up with is a whole that can really deliver much more than the sum of its parts. So thinking on the next slide, in terms of how digital and PR can best work together, it's maybe helpful to look at what the strengths of each one are, and where the opportunities for collaboration and for overlap emerge. So I wanted to start with PR. If we think about this, what is this actually for? What does a good PR campaign do for you, for your organization? And I think, put very simply, I think we can say this is particularly true for asset management. This is really about two things. The first is about building credibility through high-profile third-party endorsement in the form of high-quality independent media coverage. And the second is about how you can reach a very broad audience with key messages or ideas. And PR, when you do it well, can be very, very effective in achieving this. And in doing so, it can really deliver very significant value for your brand. But I think it's fair to say what it's maybe less good at is about reliably precipitating a specific action and about sort of understanding customers and how they work towards that action. So, for example, we can see maybe if there was an increase in web traffic following a major announcement or a big interview or a big article. We can see how many copies of a report were downloaded. We can even try and get a sense of how successful we've been in terms of shifting customer perceptions by, speaking to people within the business, understanding what conversations they have been having. But the challenge is we don't really know who it was that found our media coverage engaging, what the nature of their interest was, whether this might lead to investment. And so it becomes really hard to pin down the specific role that PR has played in terms of any eventual allocation decisions. And this is because, typically, once we've put out our press release, we've arranged the interviews, we've secured the coverage, the PR agency's work is often sort of done, and we move on to the next action and the next activation. But in the meantime, the digital team, and often without really knowing that this is what they're doing, is picking up the baton.
Thank you, Julian. And in terms of picking up the baton, our belief, and we're quite passionate about it here at Ratio, is digital is the central hub for carrying on the customer journey. So as a marketing team, you spend an awful lot of time generating awareness and demand and raising the visibility of your organization outside of your own own channels, such as your website or email marketing, for example. And the power of digital is once you've driven those visits, driven that inbound traffic to your digital channels, is to carry on the conversation, is to identify segments, identify need, profile um, existing or prospective clients based on information they've passed along in terms of content that interests them. And the digital forms a central platform for helping raise awareness and credibility of your organization. And we're going to talk later on in today's presentation how you can leverage digital to build an ongoing conversation over many months and years, because we appreciate that within a sort of B2B type environment, your clients are not necessarily making instantaneous decisions on switching to new firms or looking to transact with a new organization. It's something which is a considered proposition from their side, and we're going to discuss how as a marketing team you can design the digital experience around the client and design that experience to then really drive what's important to you as an organization in terms of driving net new demand for prospective new sales opportunities, leveraging digital information around what content is top of mind for existing clients and prospects and feeding that to teams such as relationship managers, and how you can nurture your audience. So we honestly believe that digital, when combined correctly with PR, can help maximize the value of your investment in PR by continuing that conversation and that journey.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And maybe it's helpful just to to take a look at how the process usually tends to work. So when we sort of look at how asset managers tend to approach this, the start is with the marketing team. They work with sales, with senior management to identify and articulate, what are going to be the key marketing priorities for the next period. And as you guys will know, these are obviously typically around, brand awareness, domain expertise, thought leadership, executive profiling, and also, of course, the selling of specific products and services. So these are obviously then sort of translated and, I guess, codified into a specific corporate positioning, and key messages are developed, and the agencies are then briefed accordingly. And so what happens is then, the PR agency will go off and develop their media campaign, and the digital agency will then go away and work out theirs, and each will go off and deliver outcomes in terms of their respective fields. And for sure, these outcomes, and whether that's the digital engagement or media coverage, these will contribute towards the overall corporate marketing objectives by creating this sort of customer engagement that we talked about before. Usually this is around a particular theme or idea. And, the agencies will report back to the marketing team on their progress as they go. And if successful, both these sets of engagements, they end in the same place, with the customer being onboarded as a new client and allocated to a relationship manager. So really what we have is then two parallel processes that sort of start and end in the same place. They follow largely the same stages along the way, but operate pretty much independently from one another throughout. And look, it's not to say that this way is bad or that it delivers no value. It definitely does. But there is an opportunity to do more. And so this is what we wanted to look at on the next slide of this different way of thinking about things. And you might be thinking, well, look, hold on a minute. Why don't we just hire one agency, give it all to them to do, and it'll all sort of be joined up as a consequence of doing it that way, and it will just take care of itself. And I mean, the reality is, and I think probably many of you will have experienced this for yourself, that it doesn't always work out this way. When it comes to the smaller or even mid-sized agencies, they just don't have the scale or the manpower to do digital and PR properly. These are complex, these are specialized disciplines, and you really need a specialist team to do it well. And then at the other end, you have the big integrated firms, and they often actually tend to be quite siloed internally with different teams. They almost operate sometimes as separate agencies themselves. So the amount of actual integration that you get can often be disappointing. So what are you supposed to do? So really the key is, as we've been saying, is to think about the marketing process in a slightly different way, to think of this in terms of this single customer journey, and then working out where your different agencies fit in with that journey along the way. As we said before, PR is really great for engaging with a very large audience at once, and building that credibility. But you do tend to put your message sort of out into the ether, and it's very hard to work out what is coming back in terms of what your actual, target audience is doing with that. But if you take a more joined up approach, where the PR and the digital agency, really work closely together, really understand what each other are doing and how that works, in relation to the overall marketing goals, then you can establish this journey where digital effectively sort of, picks up those individuals that responded to the PR coverage. So for example, someone visits your website following a big magazine article, you then have the opportunity to sort of take them along a series of paths that will help you to better understand their situation and their motivations. And, hopefully this route culminates in their onboarding as a new client. But even if they don't end up becoming a customer, the insights gathered on the way, during this process, during the digital part of the journey, this can be analyzed and used to inform the next iteration of marketing goals and strategy. And this in turn can then inform the PR strategy, which will make that more effective in terms of how it can increase the flow of new prospects that continue onto the digital stage. And so hopefully you see that a really powerful virtuous cycle starts to emerge. And I'll hand back to Mario now, who will tell you a bit more how this sort of works in practice.
Thank you, Julian. I mean, so there's a couple of main challenges we wanted to explore first. Any investment in external campaigns, or the subject of today's presentation is around your investments in your public relations, is about generating that awareness. And an awful lot of marketing teams spend a lot of their time, brain power, capacity, focused on that awareness side of the marketing area. And that's not to say it's a bad thing. Running campaigns, getting great press coverage is not a bad thing, and we're not something we're saying you should shy away from. But always ask yourself, the next question is, what happens next? If we have great coverage in a key publication, it's the right target audience, it's generated the right level of traffic, we have a boost over a short period of time, what happens next? And again, I alluded earlier on in today's presentation around the question to ask yourself is, if you drive traffic to, say, your website, is what percentage of those visitors are actively researching a new firm? And typically it's a small percentage. And it's not to say you've missed out on anything in the sense of, you've generated awareness, that's a great thing in itself. But I always think you need to then keep them within your engagement orbit. The idea is if your external investments are targeting the right audience, the right segment, they're the right individuals from the right organizations, then we want to be top of mind. We want to build a relationship with them over the long term. So, that percentage of that audience who are not researching a new firm doesn't mean we don't want to create a relationship with them in terms of, making sure we get our content to them, at the right time over, a period of weeks, months, years, so that when they do have a need for moving to a new organization, then at the very least we will be top of mind. They will be aware of us, because never discount the fact that people are being targeted by your competitors, and it's very hard, very difficult to keep traction within your audience when there's so many different marketing channels, different organizations, different content that they could consume. So the power of digital, and again, it's a challenge, is how to pull them into your engagement orbit and how to keep them there. The other part of it is, the one size fits all digital experience. And it's a challenge which many organizations face, which is typically you are marketing to different types of audience segments, different regions. You have different products which are relevant to different types of organizations and individuals. And the question is how to develop your digital experience around those individual client needs, because ultimately those clients are interested in what they're interested in. And if we're able to identify, their interests, what content drove them to your website in the first place, we can profile and begin to move away from this one size fits all digital experience across, initially, your website, but also in terms of, delivering more targeted content across other channels such as, email marketing. But how do we turn those challenges and design an experience that truly captures the intent of traffic that's being driven by your PR investments, and how do we put that into practice? And part of this is about moving that audience where you've invested money driving people from an external channel to your own digital media, your website, your email channels, your database, your lists you're looking to create, and building the client experience where you control the content and the distribution. Because ultimately, I always think that designing the client experience so that it's very segmented, very targeted, and we can talk about profiling and how you identify client intent, is a purely selfish act in terms of, as an organization, yes, we want to deliver a better client experience, but as a marketing team, we want to generate a greater ROI on all of our marketing investments, not just on PR. And from my perspective, reimagining and redesigning the client experience so that it really has a seamless handover from external channels to your own owned digital experience, your own digital channels, is very selfish in the sense that if we can control that medium perfectly, we can look to increase ROI on our marketing investments over the longer term. But some of the key traits we believe should focus on is how can digital help carry on the conversation? And that feeds into this idea, we're going to talk about it in a bit more detail shortly, about how to provide a consistent client experience based on what we know about prospects and clients. Third part I'm going to talk about shortly is how we can support the offline part of your business, your relationship managers, the people who deal with clients and prospects on a day-to-day basis, and how we can leverage digital to better nurture and build those relationships with clients over the longer term. From my perspective, I always feel that clients have a strong relationship with a couple of channels, and this feeds into a concern which I hear whenever we speak to marketing teams and asset managers, the perception that sometimes that marketing is not held in as higher regard by the rest of the business, because it's sometimes very difficult to put a pound sign on the value that's being driven by marketing in terms of sales, which is why I always think there's, to explore these three areas from the client's perspective, that they're engaging with PR coverage, it's generating awareness of who you are, your expertise, it's driving that traffic to your site. Your digital channels which you own, clients and prospects are interacting with your website, reading content, reading your latest reports, consuming your email content. And the third part, which is sometimes is not talked about enough, is obviously all prospects, the goal is we want them to turn into existing clients that build a strong relationship over time, and ultimately clients will have their strongest relationship with you as a firm with the offline element, your account managers, your relationship managers, whatever you call them within the business, the people who manage that relationship on a day-to-day basis. And we're going to talk about for the remainder of the presentation how the offline element as well should be combined with PR and digital, because ultimately if we can combine the three elements, we can look to measure the impact that marketing is having from all the way from external traffic driven to channels, nurturing that relationship and providing intelligence and driving demand to relationship managers. And it's important because when I speak to marketing teams, there's a tendency, and it's not wrong. It's based around how marketing teams are set up around, individuals owning channels. That there's a tendency to optimize your marketing based on channel and not necessarily based around how the client engages with you as an organization. As a client, they will not be considering, the experience they have with your email channel, your website channel. They will just look at your firm and just say, is my experience with engaging with you, good, bad, okay. They don't look at it from a channel perspective. But as marketing teams, we tend to focus on specific channels in terms of, can we deliver a better email experience? And less so from looking to design the overall experience from how the client will actually engage with you on a day-to-day basis. The fact that they will engage with multiple channels, the fact that that data will be held in different systems, the fact that they'll have lots of offline conversations with relationship managers and that data is held in CRM systems. That it's a very convoluted experience, and it's not linear. We can't necessarily put clients into a ABC journey where they'll just naturally flip between different stages. It's convoluted. It's people go back and forth. People will engage and then come back to you, 6 months later. And from the client's perspective, it's about, do we recognize that we have a relationship with them, that we've captured information on them before, and we can deliver an experience built around that engagement. Why does this matter? So the obligatory stat is that, from a client's perspective, clients, are actively wanting a consistent experience across all channels, especially if you're an existing client. And one of the things we hear from asset managers is that a lot of their business is generated from existing customers. And those are the type of customers who expect a consistent experience more than prospects, because they have a relationship, they've passed over a lot of information. So, why not deliver a better experience for them when you know so much about them? So what's holding organizations back? So a couple of more detailed challenges around, what we see as holding, marketing teams back is, how do you match up content journeys? There's a challenge around, the external awareness that's being generated via your PR investments, and and marrying those visits up to content journeys on your site and across, email and across your social channels. Creating content that speaks to clients' current challenges and making sure we've understood the fact that different clients have different challenges, have different content needs, and recognizing that and feeding the right content to them, which feeds into how do we better profile clients, understand their interests and as they interact with you. The other one is, how do we align PR releases with own digital channels? How do we avoid having a siloed approach to, as I mentioned before, optimizing within channel as opposed to looking to optimize the experience regardless of channel. So making sure that whatever your PR team or PR agency are doing is fully briefed to your digital team, so that if you do have a big release coming out, you've got some great coverage. The digital team are aware of it, or the content team are aware of it, so they can create further content pieces that go into more detail that you can then use to then carry on that conversation and nurture that audience over a longer period of time. One of the things that we see holding organizations back from trying to better align PR and digital is the disconnect between or the lack of data that's passed over, because receiving great coverage in publications is great for awareness, is great for then reporting up to senior stakeholders within the firm, but it's obviously not as seamless a data handover as with other channels such as your paid campaigns. But actually, there's a lot of information which can align with digital that can be handed over to your content and digital teams. Such as what publications are you appearing in, which stakeholders within your organizations are being regularly used for external quotations or for producing reports. Are there certain keyword tags that we can then use to recognize intent? What topic? What are the dates when key content is being released on external publications? And how can we inform your relationship managers about great coverage and great content? So how do we create the right environment around, how do we create the right environment to then nurture this ideal audience? Because as we mentioned before, if you're investing your money in PR, then I'm sure you're investing it in terms of targeting the right segments that are relevant to you as an organization, to try and generate the right level of awareness to the right type of individuals. And then the question is, in how do we hand that over to digital? And one of the things I always see is marketing teams default into marketing personas, that you will use marketing personas as a way of, understanding who your potential prospects are and using that to create content on the website. And that is important. But then the challenge that we always see come up is, if you have, say, 4, 5, 6 key personas that you've spent time creating, how do you translate that to the digital experience? How can you profile individuals and then assign them or align them with your offline marketing personas? And the way we look at this is that the advantage that your digital channels have is that, we'll talk about technology shortly, but your digital experience is profiling, potentially collecting an awful lot of information on your prospects and clients. Each time they visit, they leave behind a digital footprint that tells us something about, who they are, what contents of interest to them, what triggered their visit, and what brought them to them. And we always think that that is the way of translating offline personas and beginning to build digital personas, where you can begin to then identify on a more granular level what individuals are interested in. Because ultimately, everyone's needs are different. And we talked about previously about, moving away from this one size fits all digital experience. And it's important. And I'll give you an example. As a marketing team, if you was able to identify, the example I have on the screen in front of me is, 3 individuals, one looking, to save for retirement, one looking to buy a home, one looking to grow their family savings. As a marketing team, if you was able to understand these 3 individuals' goals, profile their goals, and understand the areas of interest that they have as individuals around meeting their goals, how would that inform the type of experience that you would deliver to these individuals? Would you deliver the same experience? Would you deliver something different? And I always think that it's a powerful way to put it, because if you were able to, identify goals and content interests, and you had the means of then distributing that content across websites and email, you are beginning to move to a more a way of nurturing that audience that's more one-to-one, that's built around that specific client's own interests and goals. And in terms of handing the baton over from PR to digital, from my perspective, it's always quite simple. It's about trying to leverage as much knowledge, information that we hold on your clients, and using that to deliver a better experience. Whether that's, a really great email marketing experience, we're super targeted, super segmented, or, using that information to then personalize, touch points on the website. It doesn't matter where you start, but what matters is that we know we are leveraging that content, and that content could be held in multiple systems, from CRM to your website to your email marketing platform. And it's about trying to get that into a format that is actionable and usable. And one of the things that we see that come up quite often is marketing teams saying, well, we're not necessarily really forms driven on the website. Now, we do have some forms, but actually a lot of our content is not gated. So we're not necessarily capturing, as much information that we would like on, our, visits, website visitors. And I always like to turn it around and say, actually, you might be surprised by how much information we are potentially capturing on your visits, and to abstract it from, known visits such as, form completions. If you looked at the information we held on unknown visitors, which forms the majority of visits, say, to your website, it could be potentially quite a lot. We could understand, which external channels drove them to your website, what content they've read, where they read it, what time they've consumed it, what the location, what account, what organization they came for, if we have things like IP tracking in place. So even if you don't necessarily capture a lot of gated form content, you'd be surprised by how much information we do actually capture, and that is actually usable for delivering a more personalized, segmented one-to-one experience. And in terms of how we begin to scale this, I mean, I always like to say to teams, we always start small, because some of the feedback I have, or when we do similar presentations, is it's, it would be great if we could deliver a digital experience that's seamlessly handed over from external channels to our own channels and nurtured prospects over time. But like, whoa, that's actually quite a lot of work. We don't know where to start. And I always say, you can always start with a small POC, a small project over 4 to 6 weeks, where you look at just a small percentage of your digital audience, and you look to build something more segmented and targeted for them. But one of the places I always say, if you're looking to start this type of process, is to assess what marketing technologies you have in place. What is your content management system? What marketing tools you have in place? And then explore, either with your agencies or with the technology vendors, their capabilities. What can you potentially use those tools for? Because it will begin to give you ideas around specific use cases around how to deliver a more tailored, personalized experience for some of your audience. And another part of it is aligning KPIs around client experience. And so from our perspective, a lot of KPIs are driven around generating ROI within the channel. So if you spend a lot of money within PR or paid campaigns, you're looking at the ROI within those specific channels. But take a step back and look at, can you design KPIs which are measured across the entire customer journey? And the final slide, and the final thing I wanted to talk about today, and it feeds back to that slide I had earlier in the presentation, where we talked about 3 key areas that we see clients engaging with: your PR content, your digital channels, and their offline experience. And we appreciate that asset managers are typically a B2B type organization, where marketing isn't transactional. People don't transact their business online, in the sense of it's not e-commerce driven, it's trying to generate conversations offline. But one of the things we always like to think is that digital provides a digital intelligence platform for providing real intel on clients and prospects of relationship managers. So one of the things we always say to relationship managers is, if you knew that your existing clients were interested in X new products that you have, or were researching certain reports or content that you're producing as an organization, how would that influence your offline activity? Would it trigger a email or request for a conversation if you knew that a prospect had come back and been actively researching a lot of new content, that you could have a more in-depth conversation offline? And the other part of it is using the offline experience to inform your digital content creation strategy and your PR strategy, in terms of the content you put out there, by speaking with your RMs to understand from the client's perspective, what are their day-to-day challenges, what's keeping them awake at night, what are their focus areas, and then using that to help your marketing be more targeted by producing content that speaks to those clients' day-to-day challenges, and hopefully having a three-way feedback loop that reinforces each part of the marketing process, from PR to digital to driving demand for your offline teams. So that brings us to the end of today's presentation. That was a whistle-stop tour. We managed to get through the presentation in 40 minutes, so thank you, everyone. Julian, I'm just going to have a quick look to see if we had any questions come through. Just so everyone knows, if you do have any questions, feel free to pop those in the toolbar on the bottoms of your screen.
I saw one from Hagen. I think it was in relation to the survey results, just about how we categorize traditional media, and certainly it is, yes, exactly that, the sort of the print media, TV and radio. And look, we would also consider, the online channel, the FT's website under that category of the traditional media, but more we're trying to draw the distinction between social media and a lot of the sort of tactics that Mario has been talking about today as well. So which I think, as we say, people are starting to embrace, but there is still seen this quite big divide from the traditional media platforms.
Okay, we haven't any other questions, Julian, so I think we can bring the presentation to an end and give people 19 minutes back of their day. Just to let everyone know, today's session was recorded, so you get a copy in a day or two's time. Just leaves me to say thank you everyone for joining us, and Julian, thank you very much for joining us today as well and presenting.
Thank you,
and hopefully see you on the next one. Hopefully see everyone who joined today on our next presentation.
Thank you all very much.